For years, Halifax home sellers have held all of the power. We had record high demand with record low inventory levels, leading to bidding wars, record home prices, and a lot of desperate home buyers. But now the tide is turning. Inventory levels are at a 5-year high, buyers are negotiating harder, and we may be seeing signs of the start of a market shift. But if you think this means that prices are going to sharply decline, you may be surprised. In this video, I'm going to dive into the July market stats, and I'm going to talk about some of the trends that I've been seeing on the ground level when I'm out there working with my buyer and seller clients. But just before I get into it, if you're new here, my name is Andrew Stevens. I've been a realtor in Halifax for 10 years, and I've sold over 500 homes across the HRM. And if you want to be educated on the Halifax real estate market, then hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. And if you're thinking about making a move in the HRM and you'd like to get in touch with me, you can reach out to me anytime in the Calendly link below. All right, so I'm going to dive into the stats year to date, January 1st to the end of July 2025. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what's on the market, and then I'm going to dive into some of those trends that I've been talking about. So first up, so far this year, we've seen just under 3,200 sales across the HRM, and this is up 2.5% from the same time frame last year. Now, in terms of what those homes are selling for, the average sale price across the HRM is just over $602,000, which is up 3.9% from the same time frame last year. In terms of the time frame that it's taking to sell these homes, we're at 33 average days on market, which is the exact same that we had at the same time frame last year. And right now, our listing inventory levels are starting to rise, like I mentioned in the intro, and we're sitting just under 2.5 months of listing inventory, which is up about 0.4 months from the same time frame last year. Now, in looking at what's on the market currently, we have about 1,300 active listings in the HRM. This is the highest it's been since about June of 2020, when the market really started to take off during the pandemic. And if I look a little bit closer at, what percentage of those homes are in what price ranges, this is what it looks like. So under $500,000, we have 26% of our active listings. In between $500,000 and $750,000, we have 38% of the active listings. Between $750,000 and $1 million, we have 23% of the active listings, and 13% of the active listings are over $1 million. And in speaking of homes that are over $1 million, I wanted to take a quick look and just say for context that so far this year, we've had 164 sales in the HRM over $1 million. In the month of July, we had 24 sales over $1 million. And for context, in the entire year of 2020 in the HRM, we only had 26 listings sell over $1 million. So that's obviously a huge, huge shift from the kind of pre-pandemic market. But I just wanted to throw that out there for context, just to say that $1 million home in the HRM is much more common today than it was 5 years ago, obviously, as those numbers will show. So now I'm going to dive into some of the trends that I've been seeing on the ground level when I'm working with my buyer and seller clients. And the first one that I've noticed the most recently, especially in the last month or two, is that buyers are getting pickier and pickier, and they're negotiating a lot harder than they were. They're taking their time, they're being a lot more patient, and I think the general consensus is, with inventory levels rising, that if they're patient, they'll be able to find exactly what they're looking for. I've noticed this within the feedback after people are showing my listings, just kind of some of the things that buyers are getting hung up on were things that were not really discussed at all over the last 5 years, as our market was really in a seller's market. But they're definitely pickier. They're negotiating a lot harder, especially after inspections, except for, let's say, the $500,000 price range and below. That price range is still booming. But once you get up over $500,000, I would say that the buyers are getting much, much pickier, and they're negotiating much harder, and they're looking at more homes before they're pulling the trigger, just as a general statement. Now, looking at the other side of transactions in terms of the sellers, what I'm noticing is a lot of sellers that want to move but don't necessarily need to move. So in general, a lot of home sellers seem to be pricing their homes on the higher side of things. Not all of them, but a lot of them seem to be doing this. And I think a lot of them are under the impression of, I will sell if I get my number, but I don't need to sell. So they're looking at, getting a very high number for their home, and maybe it is technically possible, but it's not probable unless we find kind of a unicorn buyer. So they're saying, okay, if I get 900, then I would move, or I would downsize, or I would move, or whatever I'm going to be going next. But the problem is, maybe most buyers would pay $850 for that home, but very few of them would go all the way up to $900. So it's sort of a crossroads here here between the buyers and sellers. The buyers are being much more patient and negotiating much harder, and they're being a lot pickier. And then you have the seller saying, we're waiting for the perfect buyer. So it's kind of a standoff of sorts. And I think that's why a lot of homes are sitting on the market longer. So I talked about 33 average days on market for homes that have sold, but the homes that are on the market currently right now, we're sitting at about 1,300 active listings. The average market time for those is 77 days. So some of those are starting to get up there and they're starting to hang around a little bit longer. And a lot of them I feel like are probably 1 or 2 price drops away from selling. But at the end of the day, it's worth what a willing buyer is willing to pay and what a willing seller is willing to accept. And right now, I feel like buyers are very hesitant to overpay for properties, and they have all the data and they see all the comparables and so on sites like Viewpoint and Realtor.ca. Buyers are very educated in today's market compared to what they were 5 or 10 years ago, in my opinion. And then you have the sellers sitting there saying, we're only accepting top dollar for our house, unless they have to move and their motivation is a little bit different. So that's just kind of the war between the buyer and seller right now. And to me, that has us moving back towards a more balanced market. I'm not quite ready to say the market is shifting yet, but in my opinion, we're starting to see early signs that we could be headed back towards a more balanced market. Inventory levels are approaching 2.5 months. And if I look at homes that are priced from $750,000 to $1 million, that is actually in a balanced market. If I look at properties that are priced over $1 million, that is actually in a buyer's market. So really it's 750 and below that is still in a seller's market, sitting around 2 months of listing inventory, even less at the 500 and below level. So we are seeing that gap between buyers and sellers start to close. I would suggest this is a good thing for our real estate market. I think it's a bit of a myth that, realtors love when the market's hot and it's a seller's market and all this. And to be honest, I don't. Maybe some do. I certainly don't. I would love to see a more healthy real estate market here in Halifax with, typical price increases year over year. I would hate to go back to when we saw the pandemic type of market, when we had 25% year over year price growth. It was just crazy. And it's something that I really hope doesn't happen again, if I'm being honest. In general, for buyers, this means you have a little bit more breathing room. It means you're going to be facing less bidding wars overall, and it means you probably have a little bit more room to negotiate. And for sellers, this means that the way you price, the way you market, and the way you're presenting your listing to the buyers is more important than ever. It's not just as simple as listing it with a couple cell phone pictures and a sign on the lawn and it's going to sell. Even a lot of really good product that's priced well seems to not be selling. But overall, properties that are well presented to the market, they're priced appropriately, and they're in good neighborhoods, they seem to be selling quite quickly and for top dollar, and sometimes in bidding wars still to this day. Now, in speaking of bidding wars, things have slowed down drastically. So last year in the month of July, if I look back, 39% of the homes sold over the asking price, for an average of $26,000 over the asking price. Now, if I look at July 2025, this has come down quite a bit, and we saw only 33% of the homes sell over the asking price for an average of only $22,000 over the asking price. So that's a pretty big difference year over year. I'm certainly noticing some bidding wars still, of course, and a lot of that comes down to the listing strategy. Some sellers are opting to still price low and to try to drive that action on their listing and to try to put the pressure on the buyers to set that sale price. But a lot of listings now are pricing a little bit over what they're worth and just waiting and being patient and kind of getting an offer maybe 2 weeks into the listing and going from there. So it really depends on what the overall listing strategy is. For example, if I have a semi in Sackville that I'm listing, and let's say it's worth $450,000, that's kind of the market value. Some people may price that at $399,900. And if you do this, you're very likely to get a bidding war. You'll probably get 3, 4, 5, 6 offers, and it will probably sell in the $450,000 price range. But if you list that at $450,000, it might sit on the market for 10 days. And then you might just get one offer at $445,000 or at $450,000 or whatever it is. So a lot of times, regardless of the strategy that you're using, you're going to end up at the same price point overall, unless you're pricing it way too high to begin with and it sits on the market for a long time. But oftentimes you're going to end up around the same place. It's just a different strategy and a different kind of roadmap to how you're going to get there at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, things are still quite competitive in the Halifax real estate market, especially in those lower price ranges, anything sub 500 and even sub 700-ish. It's going to be a lot more difficult to buy a home than it would be in the upper echelon of price points. But are we trending towards seeing a market shift towards a more balanced market? I think this may be early signs of seeing that, but only time will tell. Of course, the summer is always a little bit slower in general because people are away on vacation and all these things. But as a general statement, yeah, I think we're starting to see that trend of pushing towards a balanced market. How soon will we get there? I don't know. It could take some time, or maybe we end up there, in the fall months. A lot of that's going to depend on what's happening with the immigration levels, what's happening with the interest rates, and what's happening overall with new construction and things like that. But at the end of the day, it is still a difficult market overall, depending on what you're trying to do. But this market does line up for some people very, very well, such as somebody who's looking to sell a home in the $500,000 price point and move up to the $8 or $9 or $1 million price point. Then that market is very, very favorable for a buyer like that. Or if somebody's downsizing and they are selling something in the $500,000 range, yeah, that's great. But overall, it's definitely feeling a little bit slower than it was. Buyers are a little bit pickier. And even with all that, price points are still up year over year. Sales are still up year over year. We actually saw the most sales in July that we've seen since July 2021. So it is still quite busy. I'm still getting lots of inquiries from people coming in from out of town. I'm, not thinking that we're all of a sudden just going to flip-flop to a buyer's market. I really don't see that happening. It's going to be a slow burn, but I do think we're on the up and up towards more of a balanced market, at least in the higher price ranges, but I think that's coming as well for the lower price ranges. Now, if you have any questions at all about the Halifax real estate market, or if you're wondering what's been happening in your specific neighborhood, because all of these stats I'm talking about in general are for the HRM as a whole, you can reach out to me anytime in the Calendly link below. And until next time, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support, and have a great day.